You're not exactly what she had in mind. The words were spoken quietly, but they landed harder than they should have. A few people near the hostess stand glanced over. One man smirked. Another looked away. Ethan Brooks simply nodded, thanked the woman for her honesty, and stepped aside as if being dismissed from an opportunity he had spent weeks hoping for was just another part of life. What none of them knew was that Ethan had spent the last 10 years carrying responsibilities most people would never survive. And before this night was over, someone would begin to see the man behind the worn work boots. The Friday evening crowd filled Miller's Diner with the familiar sounds of small-town America. Coffee cups clinked against ceramic saucers. Country music drifted softly from an old speaker above the pie display. Outside, pickup trucks lined Main Street beneath glowing storefront signs. Ethan sat alone in a corner booth near the window, his hands folded around a glass of iced tea. His flannel shirt was clean, but faded. The calluses on his hands spoke of long hours and hard work. Earlier that afternoon, he had spent 3 hours repairing a failing heating system at an elementary school across town. Before that, he had stopped by the grocery store, carefully comparing prices while holding a folded utility bill inside his jacket pocket. Every dollar mattered. Every decision mattered. Across the diner, 2 women whispered near the register. Ethan noticed their glances, but pretended not to. He had grown used to being measured before anyone bothered learning his name. Single father, maintenance worker, old pickup truck. People often decided the rest of the story themselves. The waitress approached with a sympathetic smile. Still waiting? Ethan checked the clock. Looks that way. She hesitated. Most people would have left by now. Ethan smiled gently. Maybe, but maybe someone's running late. The waitress nodded and walked away. There was something steady about him, something that refused to become bitter. Through the diner window, his aging Ford pickup sat beneath a flickering street lamp. In the passenger seat rested a science fair project made from cardboard, paint, and carefully wired components. His 12-year-old son Caleb had spent 2 weeks building it. Ethan had spent every evening helping after work, not because he understood every part of it, because showing up mattered. His phone buzzed. A message from Caleb appeared. Did the date start yet? Ethan smiled. Not yet. You finish your homework? 3 dots appeared immediately. Maybe. Ethan chuckled softly. The answer told him everything. At that moment, the diner door opened. A woman stepped inside, carrying the weight of exhaustion in her eyes. Beside her stood a little girl holding a worn backpack decorated with faded cartoon stickers. The room seemed to pause for a second. Not because the woman was beautiful, though she was. Not because she carried herself with quiet confidence. It was because she looked completely unprepared for what happened next. The hostess frowned. Ma'am, children aren't usually part of blind dates. Embarrassment flashed across the woman's face. The little girl lowered her eyes toward the floor tiles. I'm sorry, the woman said quietly. My sitter canceled 20 minutes ago. A few nearby customers exchanged looks. One man laughed under his breath. The little girl's shoulders shrank slightly. Ethan watched from his booth. He noticed something others didn't. The woman wasn't embarrassed because of herself. She was embarrassed for her daughter. And somehow that mattered. The hostess looked uncertain. The woman glanced around the diner, as if preparing to leave before she could be judged any further. Then her eyes met Ethan's across the room. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. But something shifted, because while everyone else seemed focused on the inconvenience standing beside her, Ethan's attention remained on the little girl clutching that backpack like armor. And the decision he made in the next few seconds would change far more than a single evening. The little girl tightened her grip on the backpack straps as the silence stretched across the diner. Ethan rose from his booth before anyone else could say another word. You can have my booth, he said calmly. There's plenty of room. The woman looked surprised. We do not want to intrude. You are not, Ethan replied. He stepped aside and pulled out a chair for the girl first. It was such a simple gesture that most people would have missed its significance. But the tension in the child's shoulders eased immediately. The woman noticed. So did Ethan. A few minutes later, the waitress returned with 3 menus. The little girl stared at the dessert page longer than anything else. Ethan pretended not to notice, but when the waitress came back, he quietly asked her to bring an extra slice of apple pie later. The kind with vanilla ice cream. The kind children rarely forgot. Outside the diner window, headlights passed along Main Street while the neon sign reflected against the glass. The woman finally introduced herself. "I am Charlotte Bennett. This is my daughter, Lily." Ethan nodded. Ethan Brooks. Charlotte seemed to be waiting for something more. A title, an achievement, a reason she should be impressed. Ethan offered none. "What do you do?" she asked. "Maintenance work." That was all he said. Charlotte smiled politely, but Ethan recognized the flicker in her expression. He had seen it before. The subtle recalculation people made when they thought they finally understood where someone belonged in the social order. The conversation drifted toward parenting instead. To Ethan, that was far more important. Lily talked about her school science class. Ethan listened carefully, asking questions that made her eyes brighten. Charlotte watched quietly. Most adults smiled at children. Ethan actually listened to them. By the time they left the diner, the evening air had turned cool. Across the parking lot, Ethan walked them toward their vehicle. He noticed Charlotte's SUV immediately. One tire looked dangerously low. He crouched beside it. "Did you hit a pothole recently?" Charlotte blinked. "Yesterday, actually." Ethan pressed a thumb against the sidewall and frowned slightly. "You should not drive far on that. There is damage forming near the edge." "You can tell from that?" she asked. "Mostly experience." He stood and handed her a business card from his wallet. The card was plain. No company logo. No fancy design. Just his name and phone number. "Call me if you need help." Charlotte accepted it, studying him differently now. Not impressed. Curious. As Ethan climbed into his aging Ford pickup, Charlotte noticed something lying across the passenger seat. Blueprints. Detailed technical drawings covered with handwritten notes and calculations. Before she could read more, Ethan started the engine and drove away. 20 minutes later, he pulled into the gravel driveway of a modest house on the edge of town. The mailbox leaned slightly to one side. A porch light glowed above the front steps. Through the living room window, Caleb sat waiting with his science projects spread across the coffee table. Ethan smiled despite the exhaustion in his bones. There were still dishes in the sink. A utility bill sat unopened beside the refrigerator. The roof would need repairs before winter. But first came Caleb. Always Caleb. For the next hour, father and son adjusted wiring, tested circuits, and rebuilt part of the project after a failed connection. Ethan moved with surprising confidence around the electronics, diagnosing problems almost instantly. "How do you know all this stuff?" Caleb asked. Ethan paused for a moment. "I learned a long time ago." The answer was true. It was also incomplete. Later that night, after Caleb was asleep, Ethan stepped onto the porch with a cup of coffee. His phone buzzed. An unfamiliar number appeared on the screen. He almost ignored it. Then a text message arrived. "This is Charlotte. You were right about the tire. The mechanic said it could have blown out on the highway. Thank you." Ethan looked at the message for a long moment. Then another text appeared before he could respond. "There was something else I noticed tonight. Those blueprints in your truck. What exactly is it that you do, Ethan?" And for the first time, Charlotte Bennett was beginning to suspect there was far more to him than a maintenance worker with an old pickup truck. The next morning, Ethan replied with a simple message. "They're just old project drawings. Glad the tire was caught in time." Charlotte stared at the response while sitting inside her SUV in the parking lot of Lily's elementary school. Most people would have used the opportunity to impress her. Most people would have explained their accomplishments in detail. Ethan had done neither. As parents moved through the school hallway carrying backpacks and lunchboxes, Charlotte found herself thinking about a maintenance worker who seemed strangely uninterested in proving anything. The thought stayed with her longer than she expected. 3 days later, their paths crossed again. It happened on a rainy Thursday afternoon outside a grocery store near the edge of town. Ethan was loading bags into the bed of his pickup truck while balancing a phone between his shoulder and ear. "Yes, Mrs. Dawson," he said patiently. "I will stop by after work and take a look at the furnace." "No, do not worry about paying tonight. We will figure it out." He listened quietly before ending the call. Charlotte had just stepped out carrying groceries when she overheard the last part. Most people in business spoke about profit first. Ethan seemed to think about people first. Before she could decide whether to approach him, a sudden gust of wind pushed a shopping cart across the wet parking lot. It rolled directly toward an elderly man unloading groceries. Ethan moved immediately. Not dramatically, not for attention. He simply stepped forward, stopped the cart, helped load the man's bags, and returned to his own truck without expecting thanks. Charlotte watched the entire thing. It was a small act, yet somehow it revealed something larger. The kind of character people carried when nobody was grading them. She walked over. You seem to spend a lot of time rescuing people from problems. Ethan smiled faintly. Usually machines. And furnaces, apparently. Sometimes furnaces. For the first time, Charlotte laughed. The conversation lasted only a few minutes, but it felt surprisingly easy. Not because Ethan was charming, because he listened carefully. When Charlotte mentioned Lily's struggling in science class, Ethan asked thoughtful questions instead of offering opinions. When she described balancing work and parenting, he understood without needing explanations. The rain continued falling softly against the asphalt. Nearby, a mailbox stood beside the highway, its red flag raised against the gray sky. Ordinary details. Ordinary lives. Yet something was changing. As Charlotte prepared to leave, Lily's voice suddenly called from the passenger seat. "Mom, that is the science project guy." Ethan looked over and smiled. "Guilty." Lily brightened immediately. "The one from the diner." "Also guilty." Charlotte raised an eyebrow. "Science project guy?" Lily nodded enthusiastically. "The night at the diner, he explained my homework question better than my teacher did." Ethan looked embarrassed by the attention. Charlotte looked surprised. "You never mentioned that." "You never asked," Ethan replied. The answer was gentle, not defensive. Yet Charlotte noticed something again. Knowledge seemed to follow him everywhere. Not the loud kind, the useful kind, the kind hidden beneath ordinary conversations. That evening, after finishing a repair call at a small house near the church parking lot, Ethan returned home well after dark. A stack of mail waited near the front door. Utility bills, school forms, insurance paperwork, real life. He sorted through everything while Caleb worked on homework at the kitchen table. Then his phone buzzed once more. Another message from Charlotte. This time it was different. "Lily has a science fair presentation next month. She is nervous. Would you be willing to give her some advice?" Ethan stared at the screen. It seemed like a simple request. But neither of them knew that the answer would open a door neither had expected to walk through. Ethan looked at Charlotte's message for several seconds before replying. "Of course. If Lily wants help, I am happy to meet with her." The following Saturday, they gathered at a community room beside the local library. Caleb came along with a box of wires, batteries, and small circuit boards balanced carefully in his arms. Lily arrived, carrying a notebook covered with colorful stickers. Charlotte followed behind, holding coffee cups from a nearby diner. At first, everything seemed simple. Ethan spent nearly an hour helping the two children think through ideas rather than giving answers. He asked questions. He listened. He encouraged them to solve problems on their own. Charlotte noticed how naturally both children responded to him. There was patience in his voice. Confidence, too. Not the confidence of someone trying to impress others. The confidence of someone who had spent years solving difficult problems. Then something unexpected happened. Another parent entered the room with her son. She recognized Charlotte immediately. "I heard your company is expanding again," she said warmly. Then her eyes drifted toward Ethan. "And who is this?" Before Charlotte could answer, the woman smiled politely and said, "Maintenance staff helping with the event?" Ethan simply nodded. Something like that. The woman turned away without another question. Charlotte felt strangely uncomfortable. A week earlier, she might have accepted the assumption without thinking. Now it bothered her. Ethan had clearly heard it too. Yet he showed no irritation. He continued helping the children as if nothing had happened. That response somehow impressed her even more. Outside the library window, Ethan's aging pickup truck sat beneath an American flag, moving gently in the breeze. The truck looked exactly like what everyone expected a maintenance worker to drive. Nothing about it suggested the knowledge Charlotte kept noticing. As the project discussion continued, Lily described a problem involving energy transfer. Ethan reached for a marker and began sketching a diagram on a whiteboard. His explanation was simple enough for both children to understand, yet detailed enough to solve the issue completely. Charlotte watched quietly. The diagram looked familiar, not because she understood the science, because it resembled the technical drawing she had glimpsed inside his truck. "Where did you learn all this?" she finally asked. Ethan paused. "A long time ago. College." "Partly." It was another incomplete answer. Another door opened only halfway. Before Charlotte could ask more, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen and immediately stepped outside. Through the window, she watched him listening carefully. His expression grew serious. A few minutes later, he returned. "Everything okay?" Charlotte asked. An older customer lost heat again. On a Saturday? Ethan smiled faintly. Furnaces do not care about schedules. Without hesitation, he packed his materials. Lily looked disappointed. Ethan noticed immediately. He handed her the completed diagram. "You already know more than you think," he told her. "Just trust your work." The encouragement lit up her face. It was a small gesture, but it mattered. After Ethan left, Charlotte helped gather supplies. While stacking papers, she noticed something tucked beneath the whiteboard. A folded document Ethan had accidentally left behind. She picked it up, expecting repair notes. Instead, she froze. The page contained advanced engineering calculations and design specifications far beyond anything she recognized. At the top was the logo of a major manufacturing firm she knew very well. A company that normally hired elite consultants, not local maintenance workers. Charlotte stared at the document as questions multiplied in her mind. Outside, Ethan's pickup disappeared down the road toward another repair call. Inside the quiet library, Charlotte held the paper in her hands and began to wonder whether the man everyone kept underestimating had been hiding something far bigger than she had ever imagined. Charlotte took the document home that evening, intending to return it the next day. Instead, she found herself sitting at her kitchen table long after Lily had gone to bed, staring at the pages beneath the soft glow of a lamp. The logo at the top belonged to Bennett Industrial Systems, the engineering company her late father had founded and the company she now led as chief executive officer. Charlotte knew every major consultant who worked with the firm. She knew the names of the experts who handled complex design reviews. Yet the calculations in front of her carried notes and corrections that were unusually precise. Someone had identified a costly flaw before production. Someone had prevented a serious mistake. And beside those corrections was a name. Ethan Brooks. Charlotte leaned back in her chair, stunned. Outside, the quiet neighborhood mailbox stood at the edge of the street beneath a porch light. Inside, years of assumptions were beginning to crack. The following Monday, Charlotte drove to corporate headquarters early. The modern glass building felt far removed from Ethan's small house, aging pickup truck, and long days repairing furnaces. Yet when she showed the document to one of her senior engineers, his reaction was immediate. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "Why?" Charlotte replied. The engineer looked genuinely surprised. "Because Ethan Brooks solved a problem nobody else could solve 3 years ago. He was one of the best systems engineers I have ever worked with." Charlotte stared at him. "Worked with?" "Before he left." "Left?" The engineer nodded. "After his wife passed away. He turned down a promotion, turned down management, said his son needed him more than the company did." The words landed heavily. Charlotte suddenly remembered the utility bills stacked on Ethan's kitchen counter, the repair calls he accepted late at night, the way he always rushed home to Caleb. The story she had imagined about him had been completely wrong. Yet another discovery followed. "You know," the engineer continued, "he still helps us occasionally when a problem gets complicated. We call him. He never asks for recognition." Charlotte sat quietly after the meeting ended. For the first time, she understood that Ethan's hidden competence was not the most remarkable thing about him. His sacrifice was. He had willingly stepped away from prestige, status, and money because his son came first. Later that afternoon, Charlotte found Ethan in the school hallway waiting for Caleb. Children moved between classrooms while teachers prepared for dismissal. Ethan sat on a bench reviewing homework papers. The same ordinary man, the same worn work boots. Yet Charlotte saw him differently now. You never told me, she said. Ethan looked up. Told you what? That you were an engineer. Ethan smiled slightly. I repair things. That is not the same answer. It is close enough. Charlotte shook her head. Why hide it? For a moment, Ethan was quiet. Then he glanced toward Caleb's classroom door. Because none of that matters as much as being his father. There was no bitterness in his voice. No regret. Only certainty. Charlotte felt something shift inside her. Respect had quietly replaced judgment. Yet a new obstacle emerged almost immediately. As they spoke, a luxury sedan pulled into the school parking lot. A well-dressed executive stepped out and approached Ethan with visible relief. I've been trying to reach you all day, the man said. We have another major issue, and the board wants you involved. Ethan's expression changed, not with excitement, with concern. Charlotte watched carefully as Ethan listened. Then she heard the executive mention a project tied directly to her company. Whatever problem had surfaced was serious. And from a look on Ethan's face, he already knew it would force him to make a difficult choice. The executive's arrival changed the atmosphere immediately. Children continued streaming through the school hallway, lockers slammed in the distance, and teachers called out reminders about homework. Yet for Ethan, the ordinary afternoon had suddenly become complicated. The executive introduced himself as Richard Hayes, a senior operations director working with Charlotte's company on a critical manufacturing expansion. His face carried the tension of someone running out of options. We have engineers working around the clock, Richard said quietly. Nothing is holding. Every solution creates another problem. Ethan listened without interrupting. I am busy this week, he replied. Richard glanced toward Caleb's classroom. I know. There is genuine respect in his voice. That is why I came personally. Charlotte watched the exchange carefully. The dynamic surprised her. Richard was the type of executive who rarely asked for help twice. Yet here he stood, almost pleading with a man most people still assumed was a maintenance worker. Ethan eventually nodded. I will look at the reports tonight. Richard exhaled with visible relief. That is all we need. As Richard walked away, Charlotte looked at Ethan differently than ever before. Not because of titles, because powerful people clearly trusted his judgment. That evening, Ethan sat at his kitchen table after Caleb finished homework. Utility bills remained stacked beside the refrigerator. A half-finished science project sat near the window. Outside, rain tapped softly against the mailbox at the edge of the driveway. Ethan opened the engineering files Richard had delivered electronically. For several hours, he reviewed calculations while Caleb slept upstairs. The next morning, he sent a short report. Only 4 pages. No dramatic presentation. No request for compensation. Just clear observations and practical solutions. Then he climbed into his pickup truck and spent the day repairing heating systems, electrical panels, and water pumps across town. Meanwhile, something remarkable happened at Bennett Industrial Systems. Ethan's recommendations solved a problem that had delayed the project for months. Not partially, completely. Engineers who had spent weeks debating suddenly found themselves staring at a solution hidden in plain sight. By lunchtime, the entire leadership team was discussing Ethan Brooks. Charlotte sat through the emergency meeting listening carefully. Several engineers openly admitted they had overlooked factors Ethan identified within hours. Others wanted him brought in immediately. The results were impossible to ignore. Yet what struck Charlotte most was not the solution itself. It was the report's tone. Every recommendation gave credit to existing staff. Every correction was written respectfully. There was no attempt to embarrass anyone. No effort to prove superiority. Ethan had solved the problem while protecting the dignity of the people who missed it. That evening, Charlotte stopped by a small diner after work. She found Ethan there sharing fries with Caleb in a corner booth. The scene felt strangely grounding after the chaos of corporate meetings. Your report fixed everything, Charlotte said as she approached. Ethan looked genuinely surprised by her excitement. Good, good, she repeated. That project was worth millions of dollars. Ethan shrugged lightly. Then I'm glad it is moving again. Caleb smiled because he had heard responses like that his entire life. Charlotte sat down for a few minutes. The more she learned about Ethan, the harder he became to understand. Most talented people wanted recognition. Most experts wanted influence. Ethan seemed interested only in responsibility. Before leaving, Charlotte thanked him sincerely. Ethan nodded and returned to helping Caleb review science fair notes. But after she walked outside, her phone rang. It was Richard. His voice sounded worried. "There's another issue," he said. "A serious one." Charlotte stopped beside her SUV in the diner parking lot. "What happened?" There was a long pause. Then Richard answered. "The board wants Ethan involved directly. The problem is someone on the board remembers him from years ago, and they do not want him anywhere near this project." Charlotte remained beside her SUV long after the call ended. The lights from the diner reflected across the wet pavement while questions filled her mind. Someone on the board knew Ethan. Someone powerful enough to block him despite the fact that he had just solved a problem their entire engineering team could not solve. The next morning, Charlotte requested every file the company still had connected to Ethan Brooks. She expected technical records. What she found was something far more revealing. Years earlier, Ethan had not simply been an engineer. He had been the lead architect behind one of the company's most successful industrial systems. His designs had generated millions of dollars in revenue and become a model used across multiple facilities. Yet buried inside the records was another story. Ethan had repeatedly challenged leadership decisions when he believed they compromised safety, reliability, or fairness. He had never been disruptive, never disrespectful, but he had been unwilling to stay silent when responsibility was involved. Charlotte sat in her office reading page after page. The man people dismissed because of an old pickup truck had once been one of the most respected engineers in the organization. By lunchtime, she understood why some people admired him. She was beginning to understand why others might resent him. Later that afternoon, she drove past the church parking lot where a seasonal food drive was underway. There she spotted Ethan unloading boxes from his truck. Not because anyone had asked him publicly. Not because cameras were present. Simply because volunteers needed help. Children carried canned goods toward folding tables while Ethan quietly moved heavy supplies beside them. Charlotte parked and walked over. "You know, most people spend their weekends resting," she said. Ethan smiled. "Most people are smarter than me." It was such a simple answer that she laughed despite herself. As they worked together, Charlotte finally asked the question she had been carrying all day. "Why did you really leave?" Ethan set down another box before answering. "Caleb needed me." That cannot be the whole story. For a moment, he looked toward the church entrance where families were gathering. "My wife spent months in a hospital waiting room before she passed away," he said quietly. "I learned something during that time." Charlotte remained silent. Titles disappear quickly when someone you love is hurting. The people who matter are the ones sitting beside you when life gets difficult. There was no self-pity in his voice, only experience. The answer explained more than any resume ever could. It explained the late-night repair calls, the missing ambition, the patience, the choices. Yet even as Charlotte's respect deepened, another obstacle was forming. The following day, she attended a board meeting. Several members now wanted Ethan involved directly because of the results he had delivered. Others strongly opposed it. One board member in particular, Harold Whitmore, objected immediately. "He is talented," Harold admitted, "but he creates problems." Charlotte frowned. By solving them, Harold's expression hardened. By refusing to play politics. The room fell quiet. Charlotte suddenly understood the conflict. Ethan's greatest strength had never been engineering alone. It was integrity, and integrity often made powerful people uncomfortable. That evening, while reviewing science fair notes with Lily and Caleb at a picnic table near the school playground, Ethan received an unexpected message. Charlotte saw his expression change as he read it. "What happened?" she asked. Ethan looked at the screen for a long moment before answering. "The board wants me to attend a meeting." He paused. "The same board that never wanted me back." And for the first time, Charlotte sensed that the next decision Ethan made would affect far more than a single engineering project. The board meeting was scheduled for Thursday afternoon. For 3 days, Ethan tried to treat it like any other obligation. He repaired furnaces. He fixed electrical panels. He attended Caleb's school activities. He helped Lily prepare for her science fair presentation. On the surface, life continued normally. Yet beneath that routine, tension quietly grew. Charlotte could feel it every time they spoke. Ethan never complained, but he knew exactly what he was walking into. The people deciding his future already had opinions about his past. On the morning of the meeting, Charlotte found him outside the school hallway waiting for Caleb. Children hurried between classrooms carrying backpacks while parents checked phones and schedules. Ethan sat on a bench reviewing Lily's presentation notes one final time. "You should be preparing for the board meeting," Charlotte said. Ethan handed the papers back to Lily. "This is more important." Lily smiled. Caleb rolled his eyes in the way only a teenager could. "Dad says everything is more important than board meetings." Ethan shrugged. "That is because it usually is." The answer made everyone laugh except Charlotte. She understood he meant it. That was exactly what worried her. A few hours later, Ethan entered the corporate headquarters he had not visited in years. The polished floors, glass conference rooms, and executive offices felt worlds away from his pickup truck parked outside. Several board members greeted him respectfully. Others barely acknowledged him. Harold Whitmore did not bother hiding his skepticism. "Mr. Brooks," he said coldly, "it has been a long time." Ethan nodded. "It has." What followed was not the discussion Charlotte expected. Instead of focusing on the current project, Harold repeatedly returned to old disagreements. Decisions Ethan had challenged, warnings he had raised, concerns he had documented years earlier. The same integrity that had earned respect from engineers was now being presented as evidence that he was difficult to work with. Ethan answered every question calmly, never defensive, never angry. Yet the atmosphere slowly turned against him. By the end of the meeting, the board voted to reject direct involvement from Ethan despite his recent success solving their biggest technical problem. Charlotte could hardly believe it. Several members admitted his recommendations were valuable. They simply did not want him near leadership decisions. The verdict felt deeply unfair. But the most painful part came afterward. As Ethan walked through the parking garage toward his truck, Charlotte caught up with him. "This is ridiculous," she said. "You saved that project." Ethan gave a small smile. "The project is what matters. You should be furious." "Why?" Charlotte stared at him. "Because they dismissed you again." Ethan looked toward the gray afternoon sky. "I did not come for recognition." The words were sincere. Yet for the first time, Charlotte noticed exhaustion behind them. Real exhaustion. The kind carried by people who spend years doing the right thing while being misunderstood. That evening, another problem arrived. Caleb came home unusually quiet. During dinner, he finally spoke. "Dad, are you taking another engineering job?" Ethan looked surprised. "No, because if you do, you will not be around anymore." The room fell silent. The fear in Caleb's voice was unmistakable. Everything Ethan had sacrificed had always been for his son. Now, the possibility of losing that trust hurt more than any boardroom rejection ever could. Later that night, after Caleb went upstairs, Ethan sat alone at the kitchen table beside a stack of utility bills and unopened mail. His phone remained silent. "No congratulations. No invitations. No recognition." Outside, rain tapped softly against the mailbox at the end of the driveway. For the first time in years, Ethan wondered whether doing the right thing was creating distance from the people he cared about most. Then, just before midnight, Charlotte received an unexpected package from the company archives. Inside was a sealed file connected to Ethan's final months at the firm. As she opened it, her eyes widened. The documents revealed a truth that could change everything the board believed about him. Charlotte did not sleep that night. The file from the company archives remained open across her dining room, table long, after midnight. Page after page revealed what had really happened during Ethan's final months at the company. Years earlier, executives had approved a cost-saving modification to a major industrial system. Ethan had discovered a serious reliability risk and formally objected. He documented everything. He recommended a safer alternative. Internal emails showed him warning leadership repeatedly. When several executives pushed forward anyway, Ethan refused to sign the approval documents. The project was eventually corrected only because of the evidence he provided. The company avoided a disaster, but some leaders never forgave him for exposing the problem. Charlotte sat back in stunned silence. The story Harold Whitmore had implied was completely false. Ethan had not been difficult. He had been right. More importantly, he had accepted professional consequences rather than compromise his integrity. The next morning, Charlotte called an emergency board session. By noon, executives filled the conference room once again. Outside the glass walls, employees moved through the building carrying coffee cups and laptops, unaware that years of misunderstanding were about to collide with the truth. Charlotte stood at the front of the room and began presenting the archival records. Emails appeared on the screen. Engineering reports followed. Signed statements. Internal reviews. One fact became impossible to ignore. Ethan Brooks had protected the company when others failed to do so. Harold Whitmore attempted to interrupt several times. The documents answered every objection before he could finish speaking. Slowly, the atmosphere changed. People stopped taking notes. They stopped checking phones. They simply listened. Then Charlotte displayed Ethan's final recommendation from years ago. At the bottom was a sentence written in his own words. The recommendation is not about being correct. It is about protecting people who depend on us to do our jobs responsibly. The room went silent. Not because of the engineering, because of the character behind it. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. The man they had labeled difficult had actually been the most responsible person in the room. Later that afternoon, Charlotte drove across town, searching for Ethan. She finally found him exactly where she should have expected. Not in a corporate office. Not celebrating. Not waiting for recognition. He was standing beside his pickup truck outside the school gymnasium, helping set up tables for the science fair. Parents carried projects through the hallway, while students hurried between displays. Caleb and Lily were adjusting presentation boards nearby. Ethan looked up as Charlotte approached. "You missed several calls," she said. "I was busy." He pointed toward the children. Charlotte smiled. "Of course you were." Then she told him everything. The board meeting. The documents. The silence that followed. The vote. Ethan listened quietly from beginning to end. "They want to apologize," Charlotte finished. Ethan looked through the gym doors toward Caleb. "That is not necessary." "Maybe not," Charlotte replied. "But it matters." For the first time, Ethan seemed unsure what to say. A few minutes later, the science fair presentations began. Parents filled folding chairs. Teachers moved between projects. When Lily stepped forward to explain her design, nerves nearly got the better of her. Then she looked toward Ethan. He nodded once. Nothing more. The confidence returned immediately. She finished to enthusiastic applause. Caleb's project earned praise as well. Watching from the audience, Charlotte realized something important. Ethan's greatest achievement had never been engineering. It was the people he quietly helped become stronger. As families gathered afterward, Caleb approached his father. "You're not taking another job, right?" Ethan smiled and placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "No." Relief flooded Caleb's face. The answer meant everything. Outside, evening sunlight settled across the parking lot. Ethan's pickup truck sat where it always had. Simple, unremarkable, easy to overlook. Yet nobody who truly knew his story would ever see it the same way again. Charlotte stood beside him as families headed home. There was no dramatic declaration, no grand reward, only respect, trust, and the quiet understanding that some of the strongest people in the world never need to announce who they are. Their character speaks long before they do. Ethan Brooks had spent years choosing responsibility over recognition, integrity over convenience, and fatherhood over prestige. In the end, those choices became the very reason others finally saw him clearly. And in that gentle moment, surrounded by children, teachers, and ordinary life, dignity received the recognition it had quietly earned all along.